Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by Las Vegas Motor Speedway, America's racing showplace.
And I said, what is it? What is it? He said, every time I come off turn 2 and look to the infield, there's an Earnhardt fan hanging through the fence flipping me off with both hands. We were winning one week and wrecking one week. Winning one week, wrecking one week. And, of course, when we got to the All-Star race, we figured out how to do both on the same night. I still will go to my grave saying we lost that championship at Pocono.
Oh, yeah.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future.
Well, Larry Mack, you taking the deal with Robert Yates, and Davey was evidently quite the ordeal. You took it, then you didn't take it, then you took it again, and you finally reached a deal at a Waffle House in the wee early morning hours. Take me through that whole process. When did Davey first approach you in the garage?
Yeah, it just seems like in 1990, the 28 and the 26 was parked together in the garage a lot. You know, they're parked by how they are in owner points, and it just seemed like we were kind of tooth and nail the entire time. 6th and 7th, 5th and 6th, 8th and 9th. And Davey and I would talk a lot. And a lot of people tied Davey and I together because of us both being from Hueytown, Birmingham area. But there really was not a tie there. About the time that I left Birmingham, Davey was really just getting started racing. And the only Allison I really knew or had any relationship with, you might say, it was Donnie Allison that we talked about before. But it seems like when we were parked in those garages, and I remember Richmond, Virginia in particular, and I don't remember if it was a spring race or the fall race, but Davey just said, if you'll just come help me get this 28 car pointed, we will wear them out. He said, we got so much horsepower, but he said, we can't do nothing with it. And I hear you. But we just talked. We wouldn't necessarily talk about that. We would talk about our race cars and different things around Birmingham. And again, at the end of 1990, Robert and I talked at Phoenix. We went up in the 28 hauler and we talked. And Phoenix then was the next to the last race of the year. The last race was at Atlanta, and there was actually an off weekend, I think, between Phoenix and Atlanta. And I accepted the job. But it was one of those deals where I accepted it, but the minute I walked out of the hauler, I was second-guessing myself. Not because of anything negative with Robert Yates or Davey Allison or the 28 car. I mean, that was exactly what a crew chief would be looking for. But I guess my heart was still with Kenny Bernstein in that 26 car because I felt like that, I won't say single-handedly. I don't think anybody does anything single-handedly, but I had start and built that race team into a team that had won 3 races.
It was your baby.
Yeah. I really looked at it that way. It was Kenny Bernstein's team, Kenny Bernstein's money, but it's like it was my blood, sweat, and tears ever since he bought it in late '85. And so we went to Atlanta to test the next week, the off week, and I just couldn't get it off my mind. And at lunchtime, I got in a rental car and drove over to the 7-Eleven across the street from Atlanta Motor Speedway and called Robert on the payphone. And I said, Robert, I know you're going to think I'm not much of a man, and I regret, I'm so sorry, because I did something that's supposed to be worth a man's word. I shook your hand, but I said, Robert, I can't do it. And I explained to him, and he says, Larry, yeah, I'm disappointed. I'm a little upset, but he said, I get it. I've been in this sport a long time, and when you have loyalty to people, that's not a bad thing. And he said, I'm disappointed. I know Davey's going to be disappointed, but we understand it. So started the 1991 season off with Brett in the 26 car, which would have been Brett's second year. Had a rough Daytona Speed weeks. And I don't remember really how we ran maybe the second or third race like at Richmond or Rockingham, but we went to Atlanta, and we sat on the outside the front row. and sat there and ran inside the top 3, 4, and the rains moved in, I think, before lap 30 on Sunday. But in the interim, very early in that race, obviously, Davey had wrecked. Jake Elder was the crew chief. And I guess what I found out later, Jake had refused to fix the car. Car was tore up pretty bad, but it happens, 500-mile race at Atlanta, 334 laps, and it happens before lap 20. You give it an effort to try to get it back out there, especially in the system of the points back then. But I guess Jake refused to fix it, and they loaded up and came home.
Wow. Okay.
So we go back in there and we restart the race the next day, and again, we're running well inside the top 5, and I bet you we didn't run 20 laps. We blew up, which we fought a lot with that 26 car. And so Lyndon, the 2 oldest kids, my youngest wasn't even born yet, we were there, we drove our minivan down, and we loaded the kids up in the minivan, and Linda and I got in it. This is again Monday. We drive back to Charlotte, and I bet her and I didn't say 10 words to each other. And we were mad at each other. I was mad at her.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just kind of beside myself. It's like, what in the world?
Got the weight of the weight.
Just can't get this thing rectified. It's like we can get 2 of the 3 parts working, but the third one always fails us, whether it's the car, whether it's the engine, driver, we just can't get all 3 plugged in on a regular basis. So we drove home, and I knew as soon as I got home, Kenny would be calling. Again, him and I talked 365 days a year, and even though I have nothing to do with engines, I can promise you I was probably going to take an ass chewing, and that's okay. But because I'm responsible. So we drive back, and Linda takes the kids in, and it's still daylight. And I'm unloading the van, and I told her, I don't want to talk to nobody tonight. If Kenny calls, tell him I'm gone somewhere, I'm running an errand, going to get a gallon of milk, whatever. I'll deal with it tomorrow. So sure enough, I heard the phone ring, and Linda opened the door to the garage out of the kitchen and said, "Larry, telephone." It's like, really? Did I not tell you? And she looked at me like, you might just want to take this phone call.
Wow.
So I picked up the phone. Hello, Robert Yates here. He said, "Larry, I know where you stand. We've had this conversation, and I respect that." But he said, "I'm going to make a crew chief change in the morning, and we just wanted to make one more run at you. Are you interested?" I said, "When and where do you want to meet?" And again, we met at the Waffle House, Sunset Boulevard, right off of I-77. Must have sat there to 3 or 4 in the morning and struck a deal.
Just you and Robert?
Just Robert and I, yeah. And what was comical, this was leading into 1 or 2 off weekends. Remember, back then we had a lot more off weekends than what they have today. So we were leading in 2 off weekends. Davey had left Atlanta and went to Donnie Allison and the boys' property down in South Alabama, and was hunting. Of course, no cell phones, no phone service. But I guess a day or 2 after we struck this deal, Sam Mance, Davey's pilot, got in touch with Davey and said, "Davey, you might want to call Robert. I don't know what's going on up there at the shop, but they've hired some guy named McReynolds as your crew." And Davey was pretty ecstatic.
So you come on board with Robert Yates Racing. How quickly did you know that you were onto something with this team?
Yeah, the good news is to walk into that situation, which was a little intimidating. I think a lot of the guys there that I knew, because again, we've been parked beside each other in the garage here, it seemed like for 2 solid years, Joey Knuckles, Raymond Fox, all those, Jeff Clark, I knew them, but I think they had their guard up a little bit. It's like, okay, this guy, he's only won a couple of 3 cup races. He's going to take our deal and turn it into a consistent winner. So it was a little intimidating for them, and I think it was a little intimidating for me. But the good news is we had those 2 off weeks that I didn't take the job on Monday night, and we had to be at a racetrack on Thursday or Friday. And the next race was Darlington, and we lined a test up to go to Darlington the next week, the second off week. And we went down there, and I don't remember, Rick, how many laps Davey ran the first run. It was 5 or 6 or 7 or something. But I remember when he came in and dropped the window net, and I looked down in to talk to him, it's like, this is going to be good. This is really, it was just like you just knew it.
Yeah.
And I remember we had a really good test. Lunchtime, I couldn't wait to go find a payphone to call Linda and tell her, I think this is going to be really special. This is going to be good. It's almost like immediately Davey and I were finishing each other's sentences.
You actually called on a payphone. What's a payphone? What's this thing you're talking?
Nobody probably watching this or listening to this is going to know what a payphone, but we didn't know what cell phones were back then. It's something you had to have a quarter to put in to make a phone call.
Well, you come on board and you proceed to win 5 races that year. Well, 4 races plus Sonoma. Okay.
I'll give you that.
Okay, all right. In all seriousness,
no asterisk back just for the record.
How huge was that for you personally? Because you'd been plugging along, throughout the 1980s, winning a race or 2 here and there, but this was like you'd been shot out of a cannon.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Well, one, Davey was right. If we could just get that thing pointed coming off the corner, I knew who was going to win the drag race down each straightaway, and it was going to be that Robert and Doug Yates horsepower under the hood. But it was kind of weird. We went to Darlington, and we finished second to Ricky Rudd, first race out, ironically, to Ricky Rudd.
Yeah.
And we were top 5 and top 10 in every week. I think we finished top 5 at Wilkesboro, top 10 at Bristol, or top 5. But it just couldn't win that race. And I was actually getting a little bit frustrated. I never thought I would be disappointed in week after week finishing in the top 5 and top 10, but I was actually getting a little bit frustrated. And we go to the 2 weeks of Charlotte. And the All-Star race, of course, was the first one, and just wore them out. I think we sat on the pole, and I think we maybe led every lap. I think that was before the invert deal.
I think they changed the rules after that.
I think they did for the next year. For 92, one hot night. So that gave me a lot of confidence, but it's like this is not a points race. This is a special event. And we went back out there the next week and just annihilated them in the 600. I spent most of the day trying to slow him down. And there's a funny little sidebar story to that 600. Davey already had kind of learned what buttons he could push with me and get my goat.
Yeah.
And we were late in the race. And, back then, Rick, 600 miles, 400 laps at Charlotte was tough.
Yeah, it was.
Hard
Still
on
is.
equipment.
Yeah.
You knew you were on borrowed time. You were running 100 more miles at a very tough racetrack, 100 more miles than we did anywhere else. And you knew it was the equipment. You were asking a lot out of it, where it was the car, the transmission, the gear, the engine. You were asking a lot out of the equipment on that race car. And we probably had a good half a lap lead with not many laps to go. And ironically, Earnhardt was running second in the 3 car. And Davey hadn't said nothing on the radio in a while. And we didn't have to make any more pit stops unless the caution came out. And all I would do is give him 30 to go, 25 to go, interval back to second. And again, spent time trying to slow him down a little bit. You got a half a lap lead, you got a 15-second lead. But the only way you'd slow down Davey Allison down is if you did something to the car to slow him down. He wasn't going to do it on his own.
Yeah.
So anyhow, with about 15, less than 20 laps to go, he finally came on radio and said, "Larry Mack, you'll never believe what's happening." And my heart just got lodged up in my throat. I went, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. Here it is. The engine's
Here we go
down.
again. Yeah.
Wheel bearing's going out. Something's happening." And I said, "What is it? What is it?" He said, "Every time I come off turn 2 and look to the infield, there's an Earnhardt fan hanging through the fence flipping me off with both hands." I said, "Davey, I'm so glad you shared that with me. I'm not sure I would have made it through the day." But what an overwhelming 8 days for me. We won the All-Star race on Sunday. Linda was in the hospital pregnant with Brandon, our second child.
Okay.
And that week I was playing shuffle game with Brooke, our 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Carolyn Yates was helping. We didn't have no family here. Carolyn Yates, Robert's wife, was helping me with Brooke. And I'm going between the hospital and the shop, and I'm on the phone from the hospital talking to the shop, but trying to make it all work. So we won the All-Star race on Sunday. Brandon was born on Tuesday afternoon, and he was premature. And they felt like he was probably going to have to stay in the hospital a good 3 or 4 weeks because he was under 5 pounds.
Was he really?
He was 4 weeks premature.
Yeah.
So he's born on Tuesday. I'm still going back and forth between the racetrack now and the hospital, still making sure Brooke's okay. Well, again, back to the no cell phone era. I was walking to pit road right before the race on Sunday for the 600, and Terry Reno, a really close friend of ours, good friend of Linda's, but both of ours, came and grabbed me on pit road. She said, Larry, right before I left the house, I talked to Linda, and they're going to release her and Brandon tonight. So, All-Star race win on Sunday. Brandon's born on Tuesday. We win the 600. I make sure the car gets through all the inspection process, drive to the hospital, pick Linda and Brandon up, and take them home. Most overwhelming 8 days I could have ever imagined having.
Holy cow, man.
So, it was very cool.
So, you go from 1991, first year with Davey, you go into 1992, and Larry Mack, you and I have talked before. I don't know of any race team in general, and any crew chief in particular, that dealt with more than you guys did in 92, 93, and 94.
Yeah.
You could write books, you could make movies off of it. Start with 1992. What goes through your mind when you think of that year?
That if you look at the almost 70-year history of NASCAR, that you could look low and high and far and near, and I don't think you could ever find a driver in a race team that went through so many highs, and there was a lot of highs, and so many lows. I just don't know if it would be physically possible to find a team that endured so much. How could you start the season any bigger than winning the Daytona 500? And we got into a little bit of a deal, it seemed like. We were winning one week and wrecking one week. Winning one week, wrecking one week. And, of course, when we got to the All-Star race, we figured out how to do both on the same night. And it was a very up-and-down roller coaster. And, you win this race, and your driver's being airlifted to the hospital. How are you supposed to feel? It's like, I just want to get to the hospital and check on Davey. I remember sitting on a cooler behind our hauler. This just goes to show you a little bit about the camaraderie in that garage area back then and even today. But I remember sitting on a cooler right after the race and almost just sitting there kind of in a funk, waiting to load this destroyed race car up and get to the hospital. And Tim Brewer, crew chief for, of course, Bill, for Junior, walked over and sat down on the cooler, and he says, man, y'all tore some race cars up, hadn't you? I said, Tim, you have no idea. I said, we are out. I said, what you just saw is it, other than our Daytona Talladega cars and our Sonoma car. I said, we are out. I said, the guys are working as we speak on our, we would have hoped would have been our backup car for the 600, but now it's going to be our primary. And, of course, we're getting ready to go to Charlotte, the Dover, the Pocono, the Michigan, the Sonoma. We're getting ready to do this little trek. And he says, why don't you send Norman up to Eagle Hollow? He said, I got a car up there that we actually won one of those 4 in a row with back, earlier in the year. He said, we're not using it. He said, just stick it in the top of the hauler and keep it as a backup and keep it as long as you need it. And the whole month of June, in the top of that hauler was a Budweiser car with Texaco Howland decals stuck down in the right window in case we ended up having to use it somewhere.
I think that's the most incredible story because, as we know, Atlanta that year, the championship comes down to the 11 car, Bill Elliott.
At that point, Rick, the 7 wasn't even in the picture.
Oh, yeah.
And already at that point, Mark Martin and them were flirting with some good runs and Harry Gant, but it looked like that at that point, it was going to be the 11 and the 28, going down to the wire on this deal. But just so many other things happened that ancillary things. Pop Allison, Bobby's dad, Davey's grandfather, passed away. And the same weekend at Bristol, we crashed and he cracked some ribs. And then the next week, we go to North Wilkesboro, and we're just trying to make sure Davey starts that race. Because, again, we're already in the thick of this championship. And Jimmy Hensley did about all the practice, and Davey ran a few laps in happy hour. But Jimmy Hensley ran majority of the practice in qualifying, and it didn't take long in that race. I mean, it was about 90 degrees that day, and poor Jimmy Hensley stood there all day long in the pits with the uniform on and his helmet under his arm. But it didn't take long to realize, I believe we got a race car that can win this race. And I walked over probably 150 laps in the race, and I said, Jimmy, we appreciate what you've done, and you are welcome to stay with us, but I'm telling you, he ain't getting out of that car. And he didn't, and we ended up winning the race. Yeah. Just the things like that. And then, of course, going all the way to Atlanta and having a shot at that championship. Because we got to late summer, early fall, we were kind of tripping all over our shoelaces. And 11 was too. And that's when Kowicki became a player in this thing. But I say we were tripping all over our shoelaces. We weren't running like we needed to run. But at the same time, it seemed like every week we were just trying to make Davey comfortable in that car from the Pocono crash. Yeah. And even though we went to Atlanta with the points lead, so it was ours to lose, and we lost it, I still will go to my grave saying we lost that championship at Pocono.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because of destroying another good race car and working with a driver that probably didn't need to race the rest of the year, if the truth be known. But working with a driver, especially for the next month or two, just trying to get him comfortable in that race car. And it's a year that I'll never forget. It was a character-building year. I mean, again, the highs and the lows, if you grafted it, it's a graph that would probably make you dizzy between the ups and the downs throughout the entire season.
Tell me about Pocono. What do you remember about that accident?
Yeah. We had a really good car, and we had dominated a lot of that race. And we had a jack fail on a pit stop and got behind. But it was early enough. I mean, it was past the halfway point, but this was the old days of 200 laps and 500 miles at Pocono. And it was past halfway, but I remember telling Davey, we can get back. We can do it. I mean, the car was in its own zip code. And I remember as he caught Darrell, as we know, and Darrell's one of my best friends today. I worked with him for 19 years, stood beside him in a booth for 15 years. But I knew when I took that deal that there was some bad blood between Darrell and the Allisons. It was mainly between Darrell and Bobby, but I think it was hereditary. I think it just got passed down the pipe to Davey. Heck, the second or third race I was working with Davey at Bristol in 91, I mean, Davey spun him out coming off 4. I can't challenge that. And they put Davey to the rear of the field. And we had a rain delay, and I walked down there to check on the car, and Davey in 1 and 2, and him and Darrell are nose to nose, pointing their finger in each other's chests. Yeah. So I knew I'd kind of inherited this as well. Yeah. But I watched him catch Darrell, and Darrell had a pretty good car that day. It was not in the same zone as the 28. I mean, Darrell ended up winning the race, which kind of added insult to injury on top of it. But I watched going down into 1, down the long straightaway, Darrell chopped him about 2 or 3 laps in a row. And I even told him on radio, I said, Davey, be patient. Just pass him when you know you can pass him. Don't get yourself in trouble. And so same thing happened this lap. Watched him chop him going into 1. And, we didn't, all you know is what you hear on the radio. And I saw the caution flag waving, and I knew we had to be somewhere probably on the backside. And I heard Terry Thronberg, our spotter, go, Davey, you okay? Davey, you okay? Wow. And Robert, who scanned NASCAR and who scanned other drivers, I looked around at him and he was as white as a sheet because of what he was hearing NASCAR and other drivers that drove by that wreck. Mm-hmm. And, we knew once we got to the infield care center and they had airlifted him that it didn't appear there were any life-threatening injuries, but that he was hurt. And we got all our stuff loaded up, and again, I remember driving out. We used to go backwards down the front straightaway after the race to go out the gate between 2 and 3, and I remember looking over and seeing Darrell and that 17 bunch celebrating victory lane. It made me just want to stop the car and get out and go over there and just yank them out of victory lane. It's like, how in the hell can y'all celebrate?
Yeah.
But anyhow, we go to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, Robert and I are, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What do you think we need to do? And we get to the hospital, and Judy Allison met us in the hallway, and she says, guys, I just want to tell you, he does not look the greatest. He's very swollen from the G-forces.
Yeah, yeah.
And sure enough, we walked in that room, and the poor little guy, his ears looked like they were back around on the back side of his head.
Yeah.
His forehead looked like it was about that big just from the swelling.
Yeah.
But he looked at us, and he didn't say, hello, how are you? He looked at us and says, I'm going to kill that son of a bitch. I'm going to kill that son of a bitch dead.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he says, what are you guys doing here? Well, Davey, we want to come check on you and see how you are. Get back to Charlotte and get my Talladega car ready. Okay, but we maybe, he said, no, there's no talking about it. I will be in Talladega and I will run that race. Well, we had lost the points lead by virtue of wherever Bill finished and the wreck that we had. So we go to Talladega, and weirdest weekend, Bobby Hillen, who didn't have a ride, we took him down there, practiced the car, qualified the car. We'd been working with Les Richter and Dick Beatty on Davey. Davey came over to a hangar over on the backside of the racetrack on Saturday. We took a show car over there, practiced and getting him in and out of the race car. And so Davey's going to start the car at the rear of the field, and Les Richter called Robert and I over to the trailer on Saturday. Davey had to make some laps in that car. So we got him over there, and he made couple of 3 laps in the car by himself on Saturday. So we got over to the NASCAR hauler, and I said, Les, I think we got a good plan. I said, Davey's going to start at the rear of the field, and I said, we'll just stay out of harm's way, and then we'll get the first caution. And he stopped me, says, you don't have a plan. We got a plan. You'll play by our plan. He says, we will make the decision when he gets out of that car. He said, caution or no caution. We're allowing you to let him start that race. By the way, with his hand Velcroed to a shifter, we're not going to have him out there very long in this environment.
And this was Richter or Beatty?
Les Richter.
Okay.
And he says, he starts at the rear, and if he so much as passes a car, we will bring him in, and you'll get him out then. And Rick, we start that race, and there is not a cloud in the flipping sky. That sky is as blue could be.
I was there that day.
And about lap 11, just got this little rainstorm. Not even enough to wet the racetrack, but enough that they threw the caution. And we got Davey out, got Bobby in. And we'd have won that race that day if Bobby Hillen hadn't panicked on me. It came down to 4 race cars.
Yeah.
2 Junior Johnson cars, Bill and Sterling, Ernie Irvin in the 4, and Bobby Hillen in the 28. Well, I knew, even though it was 3 Fords and a Chevrolet, that it was this 28 and this 4 versus these 2 Junior Johnson Fords. So Tony Glover and I, we had to make a green flag stop late in the race. And we were running, I think, maybe 3rd. Junior's cars were leading. And Tony Glover and I had been communicating, no matter what the Junior Johnson cars did, we were going to pit together. We were both going to do the same thing. And no matter what those cars did, we were coming together. Well, here comes the Junior Johnson cars peeling off, and Hillen panicked and said, they're pitting, I'm pitting with them, and left poor Ernie Irvin. Ernie went on to win the race. Yeah. But we'd have won that race. We still finished 3rd and still took the points lead back.
So you go from that, and like you said earlier, you were just keeping Davey comfortable in the car, and then Clifford's accident happened. Was there ever a chance that Davey was going to get out of the car even then?
Nope.
Yeah.
You know, it was Michigan weekend in August, and the Xfinity Series cars were up there a day early. I keep going back to it. No cell phones. Nobody had cell phones. And Davey had good friends up there that lived on the lake near the racetrack that he would go up and stay with, John LaFear and his wife. And he had went up there on Tuesday or Wednesday to hang out with them and fish or whatever. And so we were actually flying commercial up. And we had left the shop right before lunchtime, and we all went home to clean up. And when I got home, Linda says, "Larry, you need to call the shop." And I said, "What's the matter?" She says, "Something's happened to Clifford, Michigan." So I called back the shop. Robert was still at the shop, or he's already back at the shop. He said, "I think Clifford has been killed in a crash in Michigan." It's like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. And so I go back to the shop. We fly up to Michigan and get to the hotel, the Hampton Inn there in Ann Arbor, and Robert and I were rooming together, and we're trying to find Davey and get in touch with Davey. Finally got in touch with him. And I was on the phone with him. I said, "Davey," I said, what do you want us to do? I said, "I know I can call, oh my gosh, Jim Sauter. I think he's available." He says, "Why?" I said, "Well, Davey, I would assume you want to go back to Hueytown." He said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "Yeah, my brother was killed today." And, of course, remember, this is just a month or a little less than this crash he had at Pocono. He said, "Yeah, my brother was killed today." And he said, "I've got a hole in me that burns when the wind blows." But he said, "I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to do my job, and we're going to win this race on Sunday, and then we'll go back and take care of business in Hueytown." It's so amazing. It took Davey, who had this horrendous crash at Pocono, who just had lost his brother, it took him to get Robert and I straightened out. We were the ones ready to bail on this deal.
Yeah.
You know, not bail on the race, but put somebody else in it to let him go home and grieve his brother's loss. But that's why even today he's still my inspiration.